Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first online event of June. With me here is Jean-Francois, all the way from Montreal, joining us from BDC.
Hi.
And we're looking forward to him talking about pre-recorded video interview tips. So he's going to be talking about how to do online interviews, and I do a lot of it too. So it'll be great for me to learn as much as I can from Jean-Francois as well. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Sonia Siddiqui, and I'm going to walk you through the next steps. I'm going to hand it over to Jean-Francois if you want to talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move into the presentation.
Hi everybody. My name is Jean-Francois. I'm based in Montreal and work for BDC as a talent acquisition advisor. Been there for 2 years, and I mostly recruit for the corporate functions. So everything that's IT, finance, marketing, HR, and so on. Also recruit from some roles in our BDC Capital line of business that I might talk about a bit later. Which are big finance role in different types of financing throughout Canada. So that's pretty much it. Yes. All right. If we start, let's say the presentation. So today, I'm here to give you some tips on both video and in-person interviews. They're both very different, but also quite similar in some aspect. But before, so if you go on the next slide, just a quick agenda for today. So I'll quickly introduce BDC so you guys can understand a bit what we do and how we connect with the Canadian community. The second point of the agenda will be about video interviews, so what it is and what to do, what not to do. Third would be the in-person interview with kind of a similar idea. So what to do, what not to do, and some sample questions that are often asked. And I will finish with some concluding remarks. And then, of course, we'll have the Q&A portion of the call. So on to the next slide. And again, thank you, Sonia. So if we talk about BDC, BDC is actually the only bank in Canada that's exclusively devoted to entrepreneurs. So we are a Crown corporation, which means we're financed by the government of Canada, and our mandate is really to foster the entrepreneurship in Canada. So we help mid-sized businesses. It could be the coffee that's around the corner or the business in manufacturing. We have a lot of different clients. And we accompany them from the earlier stage to their growth, which is kind of what we offer. On to the next slide, you guys can see that. Next slide, Sonia. Okay, thank you very much. So we do serve a lot of entrepreneurs through Canada. So we have more than 40,000 employers that we serve right now. We have a lot of different business centers throughout Canada. So I'm talking from the head office in Montreal, but we have some offices from east coast to west coast, as well as in the Northwest Territories. So we have a lot of people, and as a number of employees, we're I would say around 2,200 employees scattered throughout Canada. On the next slide, briefly what we can offer, we offer some financing, some traditional loans, I would say, but with more flexible rates, and we tolerate higher risk because we're there to support the entrepreneurs throughout Canada. We also have some advisory services to complement this, and specialized financing like venture capital or growth capital. On the next slide, maybe finally, we've been recognized as a pretty good employer, actually. So we've been part of Canada's top 100 employers. It's been 12 years in a row now, and we're a B corporation, and we have been selected as a best diversity employer also, because diversity is one of our, I would say, core values. So that's pretty much it. If we go on the next slide. Okay, let's talk about the video interview. So what's a video interview? there's I would say some various types of video interview, but the one we use at BDC and that's been using, that's going to be used more and more in the market is a pre-recorded video interview. So when you're invited to that, you actually have to answer to some pre-recorded questions. So you're going to see a video of a BDC employee asking you a question. And after that, you have some preparation time to kind of prep your answer, and you have some time to record yourself. It replaces, I would say, the more common phone interview. The advantage of it is that you can do pretty much at any time. You don't have to coordinate with a recruiter to find a time that's convenient to both parties. So that's the advantage. It might sound intimidating, but if you prepare yourself, it's not more difficult than, I would say, a phone interview. And also another advantage is you can do it from a computer, but also from a smartphone or a tablet. That's it. So on to the next slide. So what's the setting? You know, since you're recording yourself and this is the first contact or the first image you have with the employer, you have to dress in a professional way. So usually, you know, yeah, you choose a setting. You make sure that the background is something that's professional, so no posters on the wall or anything. Just make sure that it's like a traditional in-person interview, let's say. Also important, just be sure that you have a good internet connection, and very important, be sure that you're not going to be disturbed during the interview. So if you have kids at home, make sure that everything is well. So during the process, which lasts about, I would say, 25 to 40 minutes maximum. So during the process, make sure that you're not disturbed by anybody or anything, any phone, for example, and just be dynamic and smile. You're answering to somebody that's pre-recorded, but it's important to have to be dynamic and you know, be positive. Like I mentioned, you have some time to prepare yourself. Something that's also important is it's like any interview. So just, you know, practice some questions maybe before and avoid reading notes. So if, you know, if you look down at some notes and reading them, kind of gives a maybe not a very good image. And lastly, but very, very important point, you have to listen to the question. So if you're stressed a bit, just, you know, breathe and understand what is the question and be sure to answer to it in a proper way. And don't deflect questions. That's really a bad idea during video interviews, because since it's not a live interview or a phone call, the recruiter cannot ask probing questions. So if you deflect a question, kind of makes the interview incomplete, unfortunately. And if we go to the next slide, so that's for the video interview. The in-person interview, so I'll take a bit more time to speak about that, because I would say that the in-person interview needs a bit more preparation. It's more complex, so that's why I want to be sure to spend some time and talk about what's the norm, or what type of question do we present in Canada. Might be different if you come from another culture, so I'll be sure to tackle everything I can on that. So the first point is kind of, you know, mandatory, but just be sure to be on time. You know, sometimes you know the address, but you don't know who to ask or where to go. So what I recommend highly is, you know, be sure you're there like half an hour in advance and just look where to go and present yourself at the counter or the reception, you know, 10 to 15 minutes max before the interview, so it shows professionalism. Don't be too in advance. So if you're like 40 minutes in advance, it might pressure the person that's meeting you. So just 10 minutes is a good idea. Again, first impression is key. So dress in a professional manner. So a suit and a tie for guys and a professional dressing for girls. It's important to look the people in the eye. So I know that in some cultures it's judged inappropriate to look somebody in the eye, but I would say in Canada it's quite the opposite. It shows confidence. So make sure you look the person in the eye, give a firm handshake. And on the setting of the interview, again, really important to listen to the questions and make sure you fully understand them. So what I will recommend in a few minutes is that you prepare yourself answering to some typical questions in interviews. That's a very good idea, but the trick with that can also happen is that you have, let's say, an answer in your mind or in your head, about a specific question. So if the question is asked a bit differently, it can be kind of a trap. So make sure that you're flexible a bit with your answer, and again, that you listen. And be attentive to nonverbal cues. So again, crossing your arms in the Canadian culture is I would say, perceived as a sign of closure, or being non-attentive. So just be sure that your arms are not crossed, and again, look the people in the eye when you answer. Shows confidence, shows that you're listening to them. When they ask some question, you can do some nods to show that you answer, and again, be confident and smile. So on to the next slide. So here, there's a lot of information on this slide, but I really want to go through it because these are, I would say, questions that you will probably likely be asked in the setting of an interview. So the idea here is to talk about the question. What do we mean when you ask this question, and how to ideally answer this question. So when a recruiter or an interviewer asks, please tell me a bit about yourself, the general idea that the person wants to know is, okay, so who's this person in front of me? You can share a bit your background, your education, and your experience. If you have a lot of experience, so 10 to 20 years, for example, just brief the person on the last 5 years. If you're coming to Canada, you can say, well, I just came in a few months ago, a year ago, and I've been doing this and this and this. I come from this country, have this, bachelor in administration or something like that. Hobbies are great if you want to talk about them. So I play hockey on the Sunday nights or something like that. The only thing is to avoid anything that's too personal. So in Canada, it's illegal for an interviewer to ask about religion, politics, marital status, do you have kids, or anything like that. So just don't share this type of information. You don't need to. You don't want to get too personal. The second question, why do you want to work here, is also a question that's always going to be asked. So this one you can prep, because it's always asked, whether it's on the phone or a video interview or in person. It's always going to be asked, and we just want to know, why did you apply here? So the ideal answer would kind of position that first you want to work for the company. So saying that you like the company because the mission or because of the values is a great answer to that. And also talk about how how you would like the job, and if the job matches your skills and interests, that's the kind of best answer you can provide. So two components, the job and the company. So I'll just take a sip of water. Okay, sorry, I'm back. What are your main strengths? That's also classic, I would say. That's an important question, and the best way you can answer that is by making an alignment with your skills and knowledge and what's asked in the job. If I give an example, if you're applying for a job that requires some financial analysis or analyzing financial statements, saying that you do possess the skill and that you're strong in it will likely be a very, very good answer. So be sure to present yourself, your strengths, in a way that make you a great candidate for the job you're applying for. So making links between your experience and the job and what's required to in the job is actually something that we want to see as a recruiter, and that will position yourself quite well. Can you provide an example of something you have? Can you provide an example of something you have to develop? Sometimes this question will be asked as what are your weaknesses? So that's kind of a cliche way to ask it, but it might come up. It depends on the company. So this is a tricky question, but the best way to answer that is talk about a particular skill that you're trying to develop. For example, if you say, well, I have an intermediate level in Excel and I want to be really better at it, that's a very good example. You can also say, and something that's good to say is that you're currently working on developing this aspect. Again, just avoid some cliches. So an answer we often hear, and that's kind of a cliche is like I'm too perfectionist. So that, don't say that. You know, it's not a good answer to this question. The question, why should we hire you, or it could be asked as what makes you a strong candidate, or anything like that. You know, this time is just saying that you possess the skills and knowledge that are required for this job, maybe position or motivation to join the company, and that you see yourself evolving in that job. That's a pretty good answer. You cannot know what the other candidates are like, so just position yourself and kind of sell yourself in a way that makes you a right candidate. So if we go on to the next question. So what are your 3 to 5 years aspirations? So that's also, I would say, a classic. You know, we just want to see in what kind of role do you see yourself. So here it's important to be realistic. So let's say if you're, I don't know, a financial analyst. Don't say you want to be a VP in 3 years. That might be a bit unrealistic, but you know, just be honest. If you see yourself doing the same role in 3 to 5 years, that could be perfectly fine. If you want to be a manager in 3 to 5 years, that's also fine. So an honest answer is, you know, also quite often the good answer with that. What are your salary expectations? So this one is the one I would really want to put emphasis on, because it's one of the toughest to answer, even if you're prepared, but it's a question that you will be asked probably over the phone or in a video interview, but surely during the in-person interview up to that stage, this question will be asked. And it's also the question that a lot of candidates deflect. So in my personal experiences, there's a lot of people that answer saying like, well, I'm sure the BDC have some salary scales, or I'm sure BDC will compensate me fairly. I don't want to talk about it right now. These are not very good answers, because, you know, we have to know the answer to that question, and it's not a trick question. It's just to see if we're aligned in terms of salary. So an honest answer is good, and the best answer would be to provide a short range. So yeah, like you see in the slide, from 60 to from 50 to 60 or 60 to 70 is pretty realistic. If you say from 50 to 100,000, that's, you know, that's too wide. And like I mentioned, this is a tricky question. The best way to prepare yourself, there's a lot of documentation on the web about, you know, the medium salaries in the industries in Canada. So try to know, and I know this is a challenge when you're coming from abroad, and, you know, to be honest, we kind of understand that. And when I ask the question to somebody that's new to Canada, you know, if the person gives me some sort of range but doesn't know, it's fine. But preparation is key in that question. So if you know what kind of ranges the job pays in Canada, that's the ideal way you can prepare yourself for this question. Another thing that some candidates do often is that they don't answer to the question, and they ask about the salary scales of the company. And I would say that we're not comfortable saying that. So again, try to prepare yourself on the question. A great way also, finally, to answer that, give your range. Just say, you know, I'm new here, I'm flexible. That's perfect. The next question, tell me about a difficult situation you had at work. So we really want to see how you react to challenges and situation. And the best way to answer to that is to use a method that's quite popular. You can go on the internet and learn about it. It's the STAR method. So what was the situation that happened? What was the task that you had to do? What action did you take to kind of resolve this situation? And what's the result? So what happened? What are the numbers behind it? Or what did you learn, or anything like that? This is an example of a question, but this type of behavioral question, we call them, is often asked mostly in in-person interviews a lot of the time. And the other example is also a behavioral question. So the employer could give you a given situation. What would you do in that type of situation? Again, we just want to see how you solve problems. So just explain what you would do and why you would do it and how you would do it. And giving an example is also good. So an example could be, what would you do if there's a conflict between you and your colleagues? So describe what you're gonna do, and give an example that would be best to answer this particular question. And if we move on. So the mistakes to avoid during an interview is, like I mentioned, is sometimes it's complex. It needs preparation. A few mistakes that people might do that are best to avoid. If you don't have any example to back what you're saying. So if you say, I'm really good at financial analysis, but you never did it, that might not be the greatest answer. So to be sure to have some examples, of challenges that you had in your job, or examples of project that you managed that are related to what you're gonna do in this next job. Speaking of your past employer in a negative way, that's also quite a trap that can happen. Even if you didn't get along with your past employer, just don't talk negatively. Just if you left, or if you were fired anyway, just say it didn't work out. This was not maybe the job for me, so I'm looking for a good fit with my next employer. Something like that in a more positive way will likely position yourself quite good. That's another question that happens. Asking about the salary before the interviewer can bring up the question. So again, culturally speaking, if we're doing a phone interview, a video interview, or an in-person interview, if you start by asking, how much does this job pay? That's not very good. We all work for some dollars and cents, but it's really important to wait for the interviewer to ask this question, because they're gonna ask it anyway. So it's a bit rude, or perceived as rude, to ask this question, particularly. Again, not answering or deflecting some questions does not appear in a good way. Be sure to answer the questions, but also do not speak too much. So if you're asked a question about a situation that happened, a few minutes is good. If you speak for 10 minutes without the interviewing saying something, that's a bit too much, if you ask me. But then again, don't just answer with yes, no, and maybe. So give them a bit more context. Being overconfident, so you have to be confident, but don't be, let's say, arrogant or think you're the best. Just say that you have the skills, and give some examples why, and the sale is going to make itself. So just just give attention to that a bit. Also, not asking any questions at the end of the interview. I would say that's not normal for us recruiters to for the person not have any questions. This is a job. This is you're going to spend a lot of hours per week on this job, so it's normal to have some questions at the end of it. Not having any is kind of surprising, I would say. So if we move on, concluding remarks. So preparation is key. So I said it a lot of times, but I really want to emphasize on it. So if you're doing a video interview, a phone interview, or an in-person interview, practice makes perfect. Like I'm mentioning, there are many resources on the web that can help you practice. So there's a lot of websites that will give you sample questions like I did, but there's a lot more of them, and some indications, some interview tips. The advice here is just to be sure that it comes from a credible source. So if we're looking in Canada, if Indeed, for example, is a good website where you can apply on jobs, but they have often some resources, or Workopolis, or any big website that's focused on recruiting generally have some great tips for you guys. And just be yourself. So you don't have exactly to tell what you think the interviewer want to hear. You just have to be yourself. Don't lie. Just be honest in your answers and sell yourself again. And the last point is to wish you good luck. It's a challenge. When you're new here, it's a challenge. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of tips and tricks on the internet, resources to help you get this job. So thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate having the time to talk to you guys, and I think we'll move to Q&A if maybe I didn't cover some aspects, but it was a pleasure for me to kind of present all of this.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. That was excellent. It's actually pretty much everything that I go over as well, and we can turn our cameras on so everybody can see us when we're answering their questions. Another thing I wanted to say is that um, the in-person interviews are very much similar to the online interviews as well, because you would probably be asked the same questions. You should still be dressing the same way, the way you're speaking, the way you're carrying yourself. So it's pretty much the same thing. And I hope everybody was able to, see the relationship between the two. Again, thank you very much, Jean-Francois. So we're going to start taking up your questions now.
Okay.
So people have already started typing them up in the questions tab. So thank you for that, everyone. Um, I'm just going to start taking the questions from the top now. Let's see here. Okay, so the first question, a lot of the questions are, how do we get a job at BDC? What is the process?
Oh, that's a good question. So at BDC, we have what we call an applicant tracking system. So you just go on our website. We have a career page, and you can see all the job offers that we currently have. You can also register your email, so you can have some alerts and triggers. So let's say you're looking for jobs in marketing or HR. You can program some alerts that if a job in HR pops up, you have an email about it. So that's the first I would say option. BDC also partners a lot with a lot of organisms like ACCESS is a pretty good example. So be connected here is actually a great first step for you guys to be seen by us. And for the process, I would say depends. For job in the what we call the field or in the business center in financing advisory services, you will be likely invited to a pre-recorded video interview. If you're applying for a job at head office or any job that is the head office business lines, like we have a practice in clean tech, that's a good example that I make phone interviews for. Or if you're applying on a finance, HR, marketing job, will likely be a phone interview. And after that, you get 1 to 2 interviews and then the typical background check before having an offer with the BDC.
Awesome, thank you. I hope that answers everyone's questions because I think that was the first question everyone wanted to know.
Great.
Yeah, and Hafsa has a question, wants to know how many chances do you get for a video interview? So, is there a specific way that your platform works?
How many chances? Okay, that's a good question. So how our it depends on everybody's platform but for ours, before recording yourself, you have some tests with the equipment. So you have one question that's actually you recording yourself and seeing yourself, that we basically don't look at because it's just some QA with the equipment to be sure that you can hear yourself and that the video is good, the connection is good. And you also have a mock question. So it's a random question that we again don't look for the
So
answer, but
it's
it's
like
just
a practice.
yeah, it's just to make you practice.
Okay.
When the real questions they pop up, you have only one chance, and the reason behind this is actually quite simple. If we're talking over the phone, I'm asking a question, you just have one chance to answer, and in person it's the same thing. So that's the kind of logic behind it, just to be fair with everybody, simply.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Hafsa. Gayatri has a great question. She's a digital marketing professional, and she says their hobbies include traveling and writing. And the reason why she's bringing it up is because she's actually a published writer in the travel and tourism domain.
Okay.
And she wants to know if that's something she should bring up during an interview.
Yeah, for sure. Hobbies that connect greatly with the job are the best actually to mention. So if you're in marketing or digital marketing and you write as a hobby in the travel industry, that's a great way to connect your skills in writing with the digital marketing job. So absolutely, I would bring it up when we're talking about tell me about yourself. You can talk about your experiences, your educational background, and that's a great way to end this kind of question. Just saying, well, one of my hobbies is writing articles for a blog or this and travel in the travel industry. And so, yeah, it's a perfect way to present yourself.
Awesome, thank you. We've got another question, and I think a lot of people have a question like this somewhere. She stopped working in 2015 because they were migrating to Canada, and then she was home with the kids, and then she was taking a course, and now there's a bit of a gap on her resume. How do you go about explaining that to an employer?
That's a very relevant question. So when we look at the CVs, yes, we look for gaps in employment, but and I'm talking about myself and how we do things at BDC. When we see that you ended your employment in a country that's not Canada, and that your experience right now or the classes you take are in Canada right now, that's in my mind, it makes total sense
Okay.
to kind of see this as, yeah, she moved in Canada. She took time to establish herself and everything. That's good. So if the recruiter or the interviewer asks you the question, what have you been doing, since 2015? Well, you can just say exactly what I just said. So me and my family recently moved to Canada in 2015. It took some time for us, to find ourselves a house, and to be sure to ready for the Canadian market. I took some online classes, to get myself a job in the field I'm looking for. So just explain that. It's some personal details, but are really understandable and relevant. And at BDC, we really connect with newcomers. It's one of our targeted groups that we want to do business. Actually, we have some initiatives connecting with newcomers that are entrepreneurs, but in the job market, in the recruiting, it's pretty much the same. We partner with ACCES because we know that actually there's that the talent in Canada is going to be more scarce as each year passes. And to be blunt, companies would be stupid not to look at newcomers. We know that you guys have some great skills, and that's the way we look at it at BDC. We have a lot of examples of people coming here having no Canadian experiences and getting a job at BDC. So again, explaining the gap here is important, but that's a great way to answer, is that you came to Canada, and we understand that it's not easy to come here and get a job in the next. So yeah.
Thank you so much, and I hope that's very encouraging for all our viewers to hear that. That's one of the biggest worries that everyone has, because, oh, I'm going to be landing and then I have to get a house, I have to do this, I don't know how long it'll take, and people are very worried about that gap on their resume. But as long
Yeah.
as you have some sort of explanation, for example, like you said, the last job you had was in a different country, and then if you've taken longer, maybe you've taken a course, you'll have the date or the year next to
Yeah,
your
exactly.
course and where you're taking it from. And I mean, recruiters know what they're looking for on a resume. So they'll go through it and see, okay, you know what? Oh, okay, she's doing a course. Good for her. So,
Exactly. If
exactly.
you
So,
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add, if you do a cover letter, you can write exactly that in the cover letter. So, me and my
exactly.
family just moved to Canada and this year, and since I've been there, I've been doing this and this and that, and that's a great way also to position yourself even before you talk to a recruiter.
Great. Samia has a very good question. She wants to know if you can give some examples of questions that she could ask the interviewer after the interview. Because
Oh,
I know a lot of people end up not asking a question because at that moment you really can't think of what to say
yeah, no, it's
or
all
you know
right.
what to ask. They're like, I don't know, am I going to get the job? I don't know what else to ask. So,
No,
what are
I know.
some
That's it.
good questions that recruiters want to hear or related to something?
That's a very good question. I'm glad it's brought up. Um, some good way to kind of again sell yourself and get information at the end. You can ask, how's the working environment at BDC, for example. That's a
Okay.
great question because it's important, of course, and you want to know how's the environment, what's the job, the work-life balance at BDC. So that's another great example. What's some projects that are incoming in the team you're recruiting for? That's also, I would say, a good question. That's pretty much what I get usually. I think that would be a great, and a great way, people like talking about themselves, and we recruiters are normal people, so we like to. So if you ask the recruiter the question, how do you like it here at BDC or in the company
Okay.
you're applying for, it's a great way to know the truth, so how the person likes it. And it's, a great way to position yourself and make the person in front of you talk and kind of break the ice and of the more formal setting, if I may say so.
Nice. I hope everyone took notes because those are great questions. That's like a secret over here. Because like, I don't know what to ask. Yeah, and I mean, another thing maybe you could do is if you've researched the company enough and you know that, there's maybe some events coming up or a new product launch or, and, happens to be the department that you're applying for, maybe you can ask questions about that or maybe, put in your 2 cents about that. So, it also depends on the flow of the interview. It's not like, there's like an automatic sequence. As much as there is, I'm sure that, you can work around it as well. Neeraj has a really good question as well. Great questions, everyone. How do you handle a technical or behavioral question when you're not too sure about the answer? You might not have enough experience in it, but that could maybe be one of those only few skills that you don't really match with the job. But I mean, everything else does.
um, I would, sometimes we're looking, if I get back to the example of tell me what you would do in that kind of situation, we're kind of looking more at how you solve problems than real life examples. Um, if you're doing an interview and you're presented with a case, for example, and you have to solve the case, the things we're looking at is not exactly the answer, but your reasoning abilities and your abilities to solve problems. Because experience in a thing is great, but there are some skills that take a lot of time to develop, and complex problem solving is one. So just focus on how you would handle the situation. So practice maybe yourself with similar question is a good idea. And if you're asked about examples, you can be honest and say, well, I didn't have experience in that kind of situation, but give a situation that's a bit similar, or even just say that, well, I don't have particular experience in that, but what I would do is this and why. So if you read on the subject, or if you had some classes on the subject, that could be a good way to answer these behavioral questions. There's no perfect answer to that. It's just how you reason and how you solve the problem. That's actually what we're looking at.
Exactly, and it doesn't really have to be something exactly what you did. If they want to know, how would you do something like this? Maybe you could talk about a story that happened and it was a little similar to that,
Yeah,
because they just really want to know how, you would go about solving a situation like that.
exactly.
Like they don't know you, they're trying to get to know you, right? Um, Dev Sharma has a great question. Wants to know if, he's given a minute to answer a question and he's done in 30 seconds. Should he click submit or should he just keep going for the rest of the 30 seconds? I mean, is it a bad thing to leave a short answer?
That's a great question. So I'm assuming, Dev, that you're talking about the video interview. If you're done in 30 seconds and you have a minute, you just have to end the question after you're finished. You don't need to record yourself for the other 30 seconds. It's okay if you have actually an answer that's 30 seconds. If you have 1 minute, we give more time than you actually need. So if we give you 2.5 minutes and you're done in 1 minute, perfect, there's no problem with that. If it takes 5 seconds, maybe the answer is too short, but don't be shy to just end the question after you're done speaking. We won't see it in a negative way. It would be maybe more special if you were to record yourself not answering to the question after you're done. So just end the recording there. And the same goes for in-person interviews. If you're given some time to answer a question, some questions can be asked in 10 to 15 seconds. Some questions takes about a bit more time, and that's perfectly normal.
Thank you. RuPaul has a question. Wants to know if you could repeat what you said about weaknesses and how do we go about talking about them in the interview? And I know a lot of people want to hear more about this question because it's such
Yeah,
a sensitive topic. So,
it's a tricky question, and it's always asked. The another way this question could be asked is, if I were to call your manager, your last manager, what would be something he or she would say that you had to develop? That's a great way to ask this question. And again, you have to position something that's related to work, and you have to show that you're been working on that. So let's say if you say, well, managing difficult clients was not my strongest skill, but I've been practicing myself. I've been having some coaching with my boss. I've read on the subject. That's a great way to answer this question. A skill like, well, I want to practice my French to be able to speak 2 languages is also a very, very good answer. I want to practice my English also is a good answer. I learned about this software in Canada that's really popular. I don't know it a lot, so I took an online class to know a bit more about that. I read something. That's a great way to position yourself. The trap here could be saying something maybe too honest, like, well, how could I say an example? Well, I'm not very good at managing this type of situation. That's maybe not a good thing to say. Or, yeah, anything like that that would position yourself in a bad way is not what we're looking for. Saying that you work too hard or that you're a perfectionist is, again, very cliche. It's like a way to answer this question without answering it. So don't say that. We're used to that answer, and it's not a very good answer. Like I mentioned, focusing on a particular skills that are related to work is the best way to answer this.
Yeah, and it has to be real, it has to be
Yeah,
original, it has to be you. So,
exactly.
something that you carry with you and, you want to work on it or you are working on it. So it's completely original. That's not something you would ask a colleague, like, what did you say for yours? What do I say for mine? It has to come from you.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like all of the answers in the interview. So Dev Sharma again has another question, who, by the way, is very well spoken, and I just wanted to say, he
No,
just
I know
wanted to
that.
say
I know
thanks
that.
to you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, he really wants to work at BDC, so Jean-Francois, watch out for him because you'll see him soon there.
Yeah.
But he wanted to know. Again, another great question. Wants to know what is the objective of a video interview? Is it purely just for screening, like a phone interview, or is it an actual interview? I mean, what is the purpose for this new technology now?
That's a great question indeed. So the purpose of it is actually the same purpose of a phone interview is kind of to discriminate between candidates. So usually if we send like 7 to 8 video interview invites, or if I make 7 to 8 phone calls, the idea is to find good candidates. Oh, I could end up recommending the 8 or the 7 that I call, but it's to discriminate. So if some candidates are better than others, that's really the goal here. We want to see what the person will answer. So if we're talking mostly about the video interview, we want to see the answers. If we're asking about skills and knowledge, we want to see what's the experience of the person. We want to get to know the person actually, and what would make them a great candidate. I know that video interviews or pre-recorded video interviews is something new in the market. Again, it could be intimidating, but just right now I'm presenting and I'm seeing myself, so just take it as that. Don't be shy and be professional. We don't look at how's your hair exactly, but if like an interview, just be presentable, be dress in a professional manner. The rest we're looking at is actually your personality a bit and the answers you provide.
Thank you. Another tip, don't wear black on black because it looks like my hair is part of my shirt. So that's something I always tell my clients, and then here I am doing it myself. Laundry day.
I don't judge the fashion too much, so but anyways.
Thank you. All right, so we have a question, and I'm sure that a lot of people get this question a lot. So a lot of people are said, you're too overqualified for this position. Why do you want to work here in this position? How do you want them to answer? What do you want to hear from them?
That's a very good question, because I think that's a challenge that I've done this kind of presentation in the past, and I've heard this question quite often. some gap can be explainable. So let's say if you're at an advisor level and you apply, sorry, for an advisor level, but you have senior advisor experience, that's fine. But what we maybe don't want to see is somebody that was a VP applying on a very technical entry-level job. We're gonna not find a good link between that.
I see that, but it ends up happening a lot. And what do these people do? I mean, they've been senior VPs and they're having a hard time finding jobs here, so they just want to get their foot in there, maybe start at an advisor position and then move their way up, or maybe just to get that experience and just to get back into the workforce. Is that something frowned upon?
Again, it depends on the link between the job and the experience. So I know that if you're very senior in the past, you can apply. Let's say you were a senior VP and you apply on a director job just to get a foot in the door. That's fine, because what we maybe don't want to see happening is you getting bored in the job, because if you're very good at financial skills or everything, and you apply on a job that's just call center or anything, you might get bored and might end up not being a great match. But I know, again, that it's a challenge. Again, the cover letter could be something explaining, I'm looking at this type of opportunities because X and Y. Seeing a link between the experience that we ask and your experience is actually what we're looking for in a job. So if you're very senior, but you have some skills that are asked in the job description, that's very good. That's a good way to position yourself. Another question that might pop, that you guys might have, is that what if I apply on multiple jobs at the same time? I really want to give an advice on that. So if it's in different companies, fine, no problem at all. But if it's within the same company and you apply on a job in marketing, in finance, HR, accounting, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, because you just want to get a foot in the door, and that's perfectly fine. But just be aware that recruiters can see that you're applying on multiple different jobs, and the perception of this is that you might not know what you want to do in a next job. So the ideal thing is to kind of want to match your experience with the job that you're applying for. The closer your experience is to the job, the better it is. So if you want to target a few jobs in finance at BDC, fine, you can apply on 10 jobs in finance. I don't mind. It will show that you really want to go in that domain. But again, I know it's a challenge, and it happens to people that are in Canada right now or that were born in Canada. If you're very, very senior and you apply on a very junior job, it's going to raise question, and we might ask, what's your interest in going, from this job to another? If you have a great answer to that, perfect. But again, I know it's a challenge, but the ideal would be to match your experience the closest to what you're going to be doing. So if you were a senior VP in finance that did really complex deals, you can apply for a director job here, or an associate manager job. That it's some jobs that that you do some business development, some financial analysis. That would be perfect. We don't mind about that if your skills are there. I don't know if I heard this properly, so I don't know.
No, I think you went into a lot of detail, so that's good. Thank you so much. I lost a question. Where was this? Sorry, one second. We had a great question here. If you could just bear with me. Oh, yes, it was about the ATS system. Can you explain how that works?
Okay, yeah, sure. Again, it depends on the company. So the ATS, again, it means applicant tracking system. So it's the system a company uses to collect applications from candidates. There's a lot of them, so they function a bit differently, but I would say mostly what they do is that you can go, myself as a recruiter can go into a job opening and to scan the different CVs. So I'm going to see everybody's CVs there that apply on the job, and I could select a few of them based on what I see in the CVs. So basically it's our system to kind of manage all of that. Like I mentioned, we can see if somebody applied on a lot of different jobs. It could be just fine, like I mentioned. If the domain is quite similar, that's fine. But if we see that somebody applied on very different jobs, it's it's not ideal, like I mentioned. But basically, the ATS or the applicant tracking system is to help us manage the flow of applicants, because sometimes we get 300 applicants for one job, sometimes we get 10 in IT, for example. It's talent is scarce, so that's basically what it is actually.
Thank you. Some people are asking, I mean, if they're not eligible to work in Canada, but they're interested, does BDC employ people and issue work permits for them without meeting them?
Can you hear me, Sonia? Because my webcam, I think, is not working very well.
We can hear you.
Okay, so just don't mind the frozen image of myself. So legally, we cannot establish work permits for
Right.
candidates. The only way we can, and it's not a policy at BDC, it's a legal thing. The only way we can do this is that if we don't find anybody, but I mean anybody in the province or the country that can do this type of work, it's 1 or 2 jobs per 2 to 3 years. It's very rare. So in order to be able to work here, you have to have your permanent residence, or if it's a temporary contract, let's say you apply on a temporary contract of 1 year and you have a 2 years permit, that's just fine. But for permanent positions, we have to comply by this rule, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Thank you. And I hope that answers a lot of people's questions. The next one is from Yoshiro, wants to know how much time do you need to prepare, or how much time do you have to prepare for answers when you're doing a video interview? So approximately, I mean, does it give you about a minute or 2 minutes to get ready for your answer?
That's a great question. It depends on the question. If the question, let's say, is have you been in the recruitment process at BDC, we might give you, let's say, 30 seconds to answer, because it's not a very difficult question. But usually I would say it ranges from maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on the question. Again, so if we're talking about your experiences, you have a bit more time to answer to that. Again, yes, you have some prep time to this, but when you're invited to the video interview, just practice with yourself. Go see some questions on the internet and just practice out loud what you would say in a given situation. It might help a lot answering to these questions.
Sure. For sure, 100%. Naweed has a question that everyone has. I don't have Canadian experience because I'm an immigrant. And when a recruiter asks me, so do you have any Canadian experience? Oh, it looks like you don't have any Canadian experience. How do you tackle that question?
That's a very good question, and a question that some people might ask. I can only speak for me and the BDC, but if I ask what have you been up to since you were here, that's a question to see what you've been doing. But mostly, and I will repeat this again, what I am looking for and BDC is looking for is a match between your past experience and what the person has to do. If you did it in another country, personally, I don't mind. I have a lot of candidates that come from different countries that have great experience. So for example, in the clean tech practice that we have at BDC, we hired somebody that was coming, I think, from India that had great experience there, but nothing here. And we don't mind. I mean, experience is experience. So it depends on the company's values, what they're going to be looking for. But to answer your question, what do you answer to that? If you don't have Canadian experience, well, I don't have Canadian experience, but I'm looking at what you guys are looking for. And I did exactly this in my home country. And this, when I was in this role, I did, this and this and that the person will be doing. I'm talking a lot about finance because these are key positions, but if they're asking about, well, you don't have Canadian experience, well, look at my resume. So in this company or this bank, I had a lot of experience in this type of client, and that's the type of client you guys are dealing with. So a skill is a skill. We don't actually mind. I mean, financial analysis, it's numbers from another country or here is the same thing. But again, it depends on the values on the company. Some people might want to trick you with that, but I can only speak for BDC and companies that have great values in saying that if you have great experience, I'm going to present yourself to the manager that does the recommendation for the CVs, or I might end up calling again. So great way to answer that is like, yes, I don't have any. But in my home country, I did exactly what you guys are looking for. That's a great way to answer that.
Thank you. Masood has a great question as well. Can you give some quick tips about phone interviews?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you
Sure.
present yourself in the best way in a phone interview?
That's a very good question because I do a lot of them, so I can give some advices. I usually, well, first thing, actually very important, if you get a call from a recruiter and you're not ready to answer, just let it go to voicemail. And be sure that you have space in your voicemail. Why I'm saying this is that we don't do this at BDC, but I heard some company do that, some phone interviews on the spot. Just be sure that you're in the right mood, in the right setting to answer the recruiter. But while you're on the phone doing the phone interviews, one of the first questions I ask is, what do you know about the BDC? So if you, like you mentioned, Sonia, if you looked at the company, what the company does, just briefly present that is a great way to start this interview. Just some preparation. It's like the video interview. We want to see that you're prepared for this interview. You've read on the company. You understand the job. An important question we didn't talk about that I ask all the time is, what's your understanding of the position you're applied for? Just to be sure that you understand good, your understanding of the role is good. And one trick that I can say for that is, it might happen that you apply on a job and when you're getting the phone call, it's not published on the website. Great way to prevent that, make a screen capture of the job offer, or download it or save it as a PDF. Do whatever you can to have the information before a phone call, so you can answer to the question like, what's your understanding of that? And when you're asked question about your experience, just again, knowing the description and knowing what's expected of our new hire will help you greatly answer to that. Generally, again, it's to be dynamic, to answer to the questions. Really watch about very long answers. Sometimes you have like 5 minutes or 6 minutes, 7 minutes answer. Just try to fill when it's a bit too much. Be as concise as you can, even if the question is about something that's very broad. These are a few tips that I could give. Be sure that you're in the right setting, that you're not interrupted, that I can hear you well. If you have headphones and you're speaking, it can work good, but might not be the, I would say, the best setting. Sometimes you can hear some noise. So yeah, these are a few tips that I would give, but again, it's very similar to the video interview.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone here at ACCES and all our viewers. That was very, very informative. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I know that everyone had a few more questions. We did give over half an hour to questions, and I'm glad that we went through a lot of them. But if you still have questions that were unanswered, feel free to email us at onlineservices@accessemployment.ca. And make sure that in the subject line you type in it's regarding the webinar today, so that we can answer accordingly. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Jean-Francois. I'm just going to go over a few more slides, so if you could hang on for another 30 seconds. For everyone, if you do want more information on interviews and resumes, we've got tons of resources online at our online e-resource center. So check us out at ACCES. And for people who are interested in taking our pre-arrival services, so we do have an online program. It's free of charge, but it is for PR card holders who are on their way to Canada. So take advantage. You can email cec@accessemployment.ca to find out more. Again, thank you everyone for participating today. I know you're joining us from different parts. You might be at work, you might be sleeping, but thank you for joining us and signing up for today's webinar. If you want to stay in touch with us, the best way is through Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. We are very active on our social media, and we update it all the time. So you'll see if there's any events going on, you'll hear about it there for sure. And again, Jean-Francois, you want to say anything before you leave?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks to everybody to being there. I really appreciate it. I hope the advice was good. And I want to emphasize that you guys had to go and access their website, all the resources I was talking about for prepping for interviews. It's all up there. So we've used to be partnering with ACCES. So you guys go on their website. There's a lot of tools that you can use for prepping your interviews and be ready for the call or the in-person interview. Again, thank you very much for having me, Sonia. It's a pleasure, and hope everybody had a good time.
Thank you again. And yes, BDC does sponsor us, our entrepreneurship programs and other events as well. And stay tuned for more BDC webinars coming up in the summer. So we're going to have another one next month and another one the month after. So they're not leaving us anytime soon.
Exactly.
Bye, everyone. Have a great evening or day, and we'll see you next week.